We had started our own podcast. I found Shannon Trapagan's Game on Glio podcast. She's a former caregiver who, lost her husband to glioblastoma several years ago and has made a huge ministry of her podcast that educates people and allows people to see the whole aspect of the experience with glioblastoma. So I was talking about ways we could partner, and our meeting got pushed from before the 27th of September to the week of 27th of September, talking about collaboration. I could utilize her network, and she was so gracious in offering and saying, you need to talk to this doctor and this doctor and this doctor. And she made specific reach out directly to these people. And I know not everyone's going to have the same network when glioblastoma or any diagnosis comes up, but it's something maybe to consider as you're faced with a diagnosis. And she connected us to North Carolina. And very quickly, this is now just the 9th of October when we get an email from the doctor there. I had provided the medical records to this center. The second opinion option is really valuable and really scary. I remember when our primary team suggested you could get a second opinion if you wanted to, but we have to do it. And thinking about getting all those medical records, thinking about getting all that work done when I already had so much on my plate and was still reeling from the diagnosis felt like a gigantic thing. But once I started, it's actually quite simple. So this doctor came back and said they looked at the data in the tumor board. The tumor board is a multidisciplinary team of oncologists and surgeons and radiation oncologists and radiologists who look at the cancer from different points of view. And that's good, but they could easily tell us two things. Not a candidate for Sonneberg because she had two surgeries, was disheartening because the reason she had two surgeries was they couldn't diagnose the tumor after the first resection. And while we waited for the pathology report to come back, it grew back as big in 3 weeks. So we had to have a second surgery, which, not thinking about the downstream impacts of that, made us not be a candidate for Sonneberg. And to not be a candidate for anything hurts. What really hurt was not being able to get CAR T studies. So there's huge amount of work happening in cell therapy and personalized medicine, spine radiation. And this one actually sent me to my knees because who knew that that decision back then, and for good reason, was going to actually keep us from doing some of the most promising, or will keep us from accessing some of the most promising treatments that are out there right now. However, she happened to have something in her playbook that was an expanded access program for gallium maltolate, which the Musella Foundation was backing. And I'd already had a conversation with the Musella Foundation. So that felt like a node. It felt like a God wink, God's hand in that. And they were preparing for us to come visit them a few days later, also suggesting a laser therapy, which no one had mentioned to us before. We were concerned about surgery. We've been suggested surgery from a couple of different angles, and combining that with gamma tile, which is like specific radiation. She talked about wanting to do next generation sequencing with Tempest. So I took all this new information that I got from the doctors at Carolina, and I put that into the same chat GPT to ask it questions. First of all, why would our doctor do spinal radiation for glioblastoma? That one, again, sent me to my knees. I didn't understand, but because I had so much information in the GPT around standard of care, which radiation was, now specifically because of our diagnosis ended up being glioblastoma with PNET features. But as you'll see, as I continued to interact with the GPT, I asked it about specifically PNET. And apparently, these are really aggressive forms of glioblastoma, extremely rare. I think the overall survival for Tracy's diagnosis was 9 months. She's outlived that 4 times so far, but it says that there's tendency to spread through cerebrospinal fluid, which goes down your spine, hence why we had spinal radiation. So it was less questioning the team and more of trying to come to grips with the reality.